Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. I am, of course, your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger, reminding you that we are all geeks about something. You are worthy of love, you're worthy of giving and receiving love, and you are worthy of your own self-respect. And one of the ways I think that we can work on our self-respect, because there's no magic pill, there's no magic words that I can tell you that instantly fix your own outlook about yourself, your own depression, anything like that, your own self-worth. The best thing I think we can do is lean into our geek thing and chip away each day at the wall, at that barrier between us and our own self-respect. That lying voice, there's nothing little about it. That lying scream in your head telling you that you aren't worthy, that you aren't loved, that you aren't worthy of love, or that you're not good enough for whatever reason. By embracing your geek thing and leaning into it and exploring this beautiful world and all the things that it has to offer and all the different fascinating things and rekindling an old hobby, starting a new hobby, you'll find that you are way more capable than you thought, and you are way more worthy of your own self-worth and your own self-respect. Okay, so most important part of the podcast is done. And again, I always say that if you stop listening to this podcast right now, at least you heard the important part, is that you are worthy of love. So in this podcast, at least I wanted to talk about, I will get into, I have a feeling that I'm going to spend the bulk of this podcast on EVs, on electric cars, just where I'm at in my own kind of thoughts of getting into an electric car, just little ideas that I have. So we'll get to that. But I want to touch on a couple interesting things first. This is interesting to more than just those who already know about this, because I don't think there's a whole ton of people in the general population that know about this. But that's one reason why you listen to Geek Therapy Radio, is hopefully once in a while you hear about something new and cool that you might not have heard elsewhere. So I'm going to start with the Pine phone. The Pine phone officially starts shipping, and what's special about the Pine phone is that it's a Linux-powered smartphone, and it costs $150, so it's not much. And the idea is that developers will get this if you're into coding, into developing, and kind of doing off-the-grid stuff, non-traditional things with a cell phone. You don't want to be tied down to iOS, and you don't want to be tied down to Android, or if you're somehow still on Windows Phone. Anyways, you can buy a phone that's fully moddable. You can flash your own operating systems to it. In this case, Linux is the main idea here. But it has started to ship. It's called the Pine phone, and it costs $150. So I want to go over the specs briefly here, because I think this is the most... If Linux isn't the most interesting thing about this, the specs are interesting, because what would you think? Just off the top of your head, what would you think $150 Linux-based smartphone would have under the hood? If you were to ask me before I have the specs in front of me, I would think that, okay, well, it probably has at least, 4 to 6 gigs of RAM, probably a Snapdragon 630 at least, some sort of mid-range processor, maybe a decent amount of storage, because after all, you're going to have to put the operating system on there and a whole lot of supporting software. No, the specs are actually quite modest. The phone is powered, this is according to Ars Technica, the phone is powered by an all-winner A64 system on chip, which features 4 Cortex A53 CPUs at 1.2 gigahertz. So, to kind of paint the picture here, it has 2 gigabytes of RAM. The GPU is a Mali 400 GPU, 16 gigs of storage, which ain't great, but also ain't terrible. 2,750 milliamp hour battery, Rear camera is 5 megapixels, front is 2 megapixels. Meh. The display is 1440 by 720. Meh. But the battery is removable, a headphone jack also, and a USB-C port and a micro SD card slot. Now, we'll come back around to that micro SD card slot because it's part and parcel with how interesting this phone is. That A53 CPU is the 40 nanometer process. It's old. Cell phones, I believe Apple is on the 5 nanometer process now. We're at least at 7 nanometers with AMD. 40 nanometers is ancient. The Q6600 Intel processor that I've been messing around with the past few weeks is 45 nanometer process. So 40 nanometers, that is straight up 2007, 8, 9-ish. It's old. It's not current. This is roughly, it's the same chip that Pine uses on their A64 SBC single board computer, which is a Raspberry Pi competitor. So the way I think of this phone is the Pine phone is it's kind of, and this is going back to the micro SD card slot. It's kind of like a cellular Raspberry Pi. That's a gross oversimplification. I know it is not exactly the same specs as a Raspberry Pi. It's not even made by the same company who makes Raspberry Pi. Raspberry has nothing to do with the Pine phone. But that micro SD card slot, what this phone allows you to do is load up images, operating systems onto that micro SD card slot and load off of and boot from the micro SD card slot. And this is per Pine phone saying this. That's interesting. A phone that is so completely customizable that if you feel like you want a different flavor of Linux on it, you just pop out the SD card, pop in a new SD card with a different operating system on it at your whim, on a whimsy, that you can make phone calls with and do everything else you can do on a smartphone, granted with 2 gigabytes of RAM and outdated hardware, so to speak, but it's so supremely moddable. It's a very, very cool idea. What you do with the Raspberry Pi is you can swap operating systems on the Raspberry Pi to your heart's content. You can start dabbling with builds of Android on a Raspberry Pi. I would imagine you could dabble builds of Android on this phone, even though I don't. Why? I can and I can't see. Like, if you want Android phone, you probably wouldn't buy a Pine phone that is based around Linux. So there's going to be all sorts of cool operating systems, all sorts of cool things being developed with the Pine phone. So the hardware isn't the most critical thing. Like the muscle of this hardware isn't the most important thing. It's the fact that you can start dabbling with different mobile operating systems on a smartphone. So the Pine phone, I think, the theory of it all is really, really cool. It's way cooler than its specs would imply. That's a very tinkerable phone. I am actually, the more I talk about it, I'm more interested in it. Okay, moving on to the next topic before we talk about EVs for a little bit. We're going to talk about Macs, and specifically Mac OS. So some folks who, I don't want to say make a living, but their geek thing is digging around in new operating system releases, digging around through the code to see what kind of stuff they can find, because a lot of times what you find in operating system code are features that are currently locked, that are not available in the operating system. They haven't been rolled out, but that the engineers over at Apple, in this case, have been started to work on and give code names to it and such like that. So you can kind of see what future updates are going to be to the operating system months and sometimes years beforehand. Sometimes these discoveries within the code never come to fruition. But there's one part of code that these Apple enthusiasts have, these Mac enthusiasts have found, that promises a, quote, performance-oriented pro mode for Macs in the latest Mac OS beta. Apple has this huge problem tossing that word pro around. Pro mode on a MacBook Pro? You mean it wasn't... Why'd you call it a MacBook Pro if it wasn't already Pro? Your MacBook Pro mode, that is redundant and stupid. You mean I wasn't getting the Pro mode out of the gate? Now, I have had praise for the new MacBook Pro 16. I think all in all, it's a step in the right direction for Apple. They are listening to the consumers. They addressed throttling issues. They made the chassis a little bit thicker. They made all these improvements that gave the processor way more headroom. Now, all that headroom allotted for was for the processor to run faster, longer, but it's still pegged, for the most part, at the upper registers of its T-junction, of its TDP. So it's running darn near close to 100 degrees Celsius the entire time, even though it has allowed for higher clock rates. So that makes me wonder, when you engage Pro mode and you allow the processor to run faster for longer at the, according to the article, at the cost of increased fan noise and heat, what are they talking about? Where in the curve of heat do they find this extra room to run longer and hotter for? I would imagine that what it boils down to is it allows it to run at those increased clocks for even longer under certain workloads before throttling down all the further. But I am not too sure. This is not a mode like I mentioned. This is just something that people have noticed in code in beta. It is not something that they have even been able to test yet. I'm just curious to what kind of gains is going to be gained in Pro mode if and when they bring this feature to the next generation of MacBooks. Now, here's the logical explanation. Here's what I see happening for real. I think this is It is giving us a look behind the curtain as to the future of Apple in the next generation of CPUs that they use in Apple products. So I think I don't think that Apple is going to completely shift away from Intel in the next generation of CPUs. I doubt they're going with AMD. I don't think Apple's in-house silicon is ready to be integrated into MacBook Pros at least, but I think they're going to go with the next generation of Intel processors, and possibly if there is increased efficiency in the next generation of Intel processors that they use, then I see activating Pro mode as being something viable. I think this Pro mode that they are discovering in the beta version of the next iOS, or a version of iOS coming down the line, I think this is getting ready. I think that bit of code that they've discovered is getting ready for the next generation of Intel processors, not for the current generation of Intel processors. I don't think the next update of macOS, did I say iOS? I don't think the next version of macOS is going to enable Pro mode. If it does, cool. I don't know where they're getting that extra juice from if the processors already run near their their thermal junction limit of 100C or thereabouts. So I think this little bit of code that they've discovered has more to do with the next generation of cooler running Intel processors, more efficient Intel processors, leaving more headroom on the table that you can theoretically enable Pro mode and squeeze out every little bit of juice from the next generation of Intel processors. Okay, moving on to EVs, because I said that I would probably spend a good chunk of this podcast talking about EVs and where I'm at with EV. I just got my car, my daily driver, serviced by the good people at Best Automotive on North Park and Kingwood. Normally I would endorse them during the broadcast, but I will mention them also here in the podcast in case anybody lives around Houston. I fully endorse Best Automotive in Kingwood. They worked on Raudi. They changed the starter. They fixed the little coolant link. Raudi is running better than ever. I bought her in 2013. She's a 2010 Audi S5. And the reason I got her is that she's the last of a dying breed. V8, naturally aspirated V8, no turbos, no superchargers, and a 6-speed manual transmission. 3 pedals, naturally aspirated small block V8. It's the the legendary 4.2 V8 that Volkswagen and Audi have used in many vehicles. It is just what, like the 2.0 T that they put in GTIs and other cars, GLIs. The 4.2 V8 is just a flagship engine for Audi and Volkswagen. So anyways, Raudi's the last of a dying breed, and I knew that. And I knew that I would go out with a internal combustion bang, and that Raudi was probably going to be the last stallion that I would ever drive as far as an ICE vehicle is concerned. That I knew at some point in the near future that the car after Raudi would be an electric car. So I feel like I'm getting near to that point now. I don't think that the reason I want to go into EV is not necessarily an environmental reason. That's just I've always held the personal opinion that the revolution of electric vehicles won't be brought on by people virtue signaling over their care for the environment. That the true revolution will be brought upon by the market making electric vehicles, A, cheap enough for the common person to buy, and B, desirable. The reason why Tesla, I still maintain, the reason why Tesla is so successful, why so many people line up and put down deposits for, the Cybertruck, for the Model 3 or the Model S, the Model X, the new Model Y coming out, isn't specifically because they are electric cars, but Elon Musk was one of the first people, and Tesla was one of the first companies to make the electric car sexy. In a land of Priuses and goofy-looking electric cars, Nissan Leaf and what have you, nothing against other electric cars, but would you rather drive around in a Nissan Leaf or a Tesla Model S? Tesla made electric cars sexy. They made it desirable. They made it something that people wanted to buy. I guarantee you most people buying a Tesla aren't buying it for the environment. They are buying it for the status symbol. They are buying it for the same reason people buy iPhones. They're buying it for the same reason a lot of people buy iPads. It's a status symbol. It's so they can walk into Starbucks, open up their MacBook Pro, and start typing stuff. It's so that they can pull up to Starbucks in a Tesla and get the attention that having a Tesla and an Apple laptop gets you. Or this air of, I don't want to call it superiority, but it's definitely a status symbol. Tesla made the electric car a sexy, desirable product and a status symbol. You do not look sexy driving around in a Nissan Leaf. You do not look sexy driving around in a Chevy Bolt. Again, those aren't bad cars. Model 3 looks better. It's more desirable. Model S looks better, more desirable. Tesla made the market hungry for electric vehicles. They just so happened to be electric vehicles. And I think once you got to that point, once the market in the industry got to that point where they just made electric cars sexy and something that people wanted to buy, that would usher in, that would do more for the green movement than buying an electric car to make some sort of statement, to make some sort of environmental statement. I promise you most Tesla owners don't care about the environmental statement. And if it is, if they are trying to make some sort of environmental statement, it's a virtue signal. So anyways, I know that my next car, my next daily driver, I'm fairly certain is going to be an electric vehicle. I just think they are high tech. I'm a geek. I'm a nerd. And it's crazy to me that in 2020, I am not yet driving an electric vehicle back and forth to work on my daily commute every day. It seems like it's time. So it's definitely the next vehicle I own is going to be an electric vehicle. I don't see how it can't be. At the very least, I mean, you could say cost. Electric vehicles are expensive, typically. Well, yes and no now. The early 2020s, we have some options now. For instance, every once in a while, quite frequently, every time I go to the gas station to put 15 gallons of fuel in Raudi, which I get decent for what it is. I get about 20 miles to the gallon on average, which is, for that type of powerful vehicle, it's not terrible. Stacked up to a hybrid, sure, 20 miles to gallon is terrible when you're averaging 45 miles to gallon in a hybrid, but it's completely different. It's completely different in a car that will go 0 to 60 in less than 5 seconds versus the Prius next to it. Completely different vehicles. They're not comparable. That being said, every time I go to the pump, I think, man, I usually get on Auto Trader that same day after I fill up with gas and look at Chevy Volts with a V, because used Chevy Volts go for a lot less than $10,000 now. You can get a used Chevy Volt for in between $7,000 and $8,000. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the Chevy Volt in case anybody doesn't know, because there's a lot of misconceptions around the Chevy Volt. The Chevy Volt is not a pure EV, nor is it a hybrid. What the Chevy Volt does is allow you to go up to around, in the newer versions of the Volt, up to around 50 miles on pure electric, meaning you unplug your car from your garage, from the wall outlet, and you drive back and forth to work, which on average, for the average American at least, is somewhere around 20 miles or so. For me, it's 30 miles, which means that theoretically, I would rarely ever have to use a gas station. When you're done depleting that 50 miles or so, it varies, of electric only range, then the gasoline engine kicks in, and the gasoline engine only acts as a generator to keep feeding electricity to the wheels, so that there's no range anxiety with a Chevy Volt. For 90% of your commuting back and forth, less than 50 miles, you never burn a drop of gasoline. But if you want to go on a road trip, you have up to 300 miles of range, just like any other car, because as soon as you deplete the electricity, the gas engine kicks in and you're good to go. You refuel anywhere. Zero range anxiety. And the Chevy Volt, like I mentioned, is now, you can get one at the cheapest between $7,000 and $8,000, maybe a little bit cheaper. So that goes back to my argument a few minutes ago where I said I don't see how it's possible that my next car is not, my next daily driver is not an EV, because I can go pick up a used car for the same value as Raudi. I would sell, basically at worst, I could sell Raudi for as little as a used Chevy Volt costs. So my next car, most likely, is going to be an EV of some sort. Now, if I had my way, I'm thinking about what's on the market right now. If I was able to go to a car dealership with any amount of money, let's say I was just a millionaire and I could choose whatever EV that I want, no matter the cost, which EV would I choose? I have to admit to myself that right now, money is if money was no object, I probably would do a Tesla Model S while I wait for the Cybertruck. I still want the Cybertruck. I still hope that the Cybertruck actually comes out. I hated the Cybertruck when I first saw it, but within like 48 hours, like a lot of other people, you first saw it, you hated it, you thought it was ridiculous, you thought it was a joke, and then within 48 hours, you're thinking, that's badass, I want it. That actually looks really freaking cool. So maybe eventually, by the time the Cybertruck comes out, I'll be able to afford one. We'll see. But regardless, whether it's a Cybertruck or a $90,000 Tesla Model S or Model X or what have you, at the very least, the Volt is affordable. Now, the other option, and I'll tell you about this, and this maybe makes more sense for those of you living in the United States, but Chevy also makes a model called the Bolt with a B, and that starts, I looked at local dealerships around me just today, just curious, what does a new Bolt cost? A Bolt is pure EV. There is not a gasoline engine in it at all. It's pure EV, 100% electric. 2019s have a range of around something like 240 miles or so. The 2020s have a little bit more range than that. So the range is around 250 miles for a Bolt, and they cost around, the dealership closest to me, the Chevy dealership, had them 2019 models for around 25 grand, which is a lot more accessible than a $45,000 Tesla Model 3. I know Tesla Model 3s were supposed to be around $35,000. Good luck getting a Tesla Model 3 for that low of a price. So the Bolt is a hatchback, and it has the same range as a Tesla Model 3. I think it's more range than the base model of Model 3, actually, and it's cheaper, $10,000 cheaper at least. And that's available right now. I know this sounds like an ad, like I'm telling you, go out and buy an EV. No, all I'm saying is, as of 2020, there's some availability as far as EVs go, and it's only going to get better and better over the next few years. So as Raudi creeps closer to the $140,000 mark, sorry, 140,000 mile mark, and more things, wear and tear items will start to go out. Like I said, I just had the starter fixed. I just had a little slow coolant leak fixed, and currently she's mechanically perfect as far as I know. She's been a very reliable car, actually, probably the most reliable car that I've ever owned. But the writing's on the wall. It may be time in the near future, within the next couple years, definitely, that I'm going to have to get another daily driver, and it will almost certainly be an electric vehicle. Will it be a used Chevy Volt, like a 2013 Chevy Volt for $7 grand? Will it be a Chevy Bolt Pure EV for around 25 grand? Will it be the Cybertruck for between 40 and 50 grand? Will it be the Model S closer to 90 grand? Model X, same difference. Maybe the Model Y will come out by then. There are some options in all price ranges, from super affordable used car to average consumer, middle grade around 25, 30 grand, up to more luxury levels of expenditure. So that's what I'm thinking. What is my next EV going to be? It's also crazy, and I'll start wrapping up the show with this sentiment here. It's also crazy to me, and why it makes so much sense that my next car would be an EV, is that I host a radio show called Geek Therapy Radio, where I often talk about electric cars, and I often geek out about electric cars. It would make sense that the host of this type of show, of radio show, podcast, YouTube channel, whatever, who is just eyeball deep in technology and all things geek. It's silly that my main commuter is not an EV at this point. And depending on what kind of EV that I get, if it's something cool, if it's a cool EV, like if it's an Audi e-tron or something like that, if it is a Tesla, if it's a whatever, but it's really cool, it's going to be called the Enterprise. It's going to be black, and I'm going to call it the Enterprise. That's what my next car is going to be. I already facetiously call Raudi sometimes the Enterprise, but it doesn't make much sense for her to be called the Enterprise because she's not electric. She doesn't represent the future. She represents the past, as much as I love it. You might be asking yourself, well, Johnny, you mentioned all this stuff. What about the DeLorean? Do you still have the DeLorean? What are your future plans for the DeLorean? For those of you who don't know what the DeLorean is, it's the car from Back to the Future. It's a real car that exists, made by John DeLorean in the early 1980s, produced in the early 1980s, with help from Lotus. The DeLorean's not going anywhere. I will always have an ICE vehicle of some sort because, well, not of some sort. I will always have at least one ICE vehicle, internal combustion engine, I, internal combustion, C, engine, E, ICE vehicle, and it's going to be the DeLorean. And I'm going to have to get my internal combustion kicks out of that because it's probably going to be one of the last manual transmission cars I ever own. Even if I had another car down the line that was an internal combustion engine, if internal combustion engines are going the way of the dodo, manual transmissions have long since been going the way of the dodo in favor of 7-speed, 8-speed, 9-speed, 10-speed automatic transmissions. Well, Johnny, automatic transmissions are faster than manuals. Well, you know what? Not all of us care about that extra tenth of a second, 0 to 60, to cross the finish line, or to cross the finish line, versus the feeling of rowing your own boat. I like the feeling of being, and I know I just sound so la-di-da about this, but I like shifting through gears. I'm a geek. I like the feel of the mechanicals of shifting through gears. I like knowing what the engine in my drivetrain is doing at all times, and knowing that I put it in 6th gear, that a computer did not put it in 6th gear, that if I select 6th gear in an automatic transmission with the flappy paddles on the steering wheel, that by and large, the computer can still decide, we know you want 6th gear, but we've decided you really want 7th. Or, I know you want 3rd gear, but it's more efficient. We're going to keep you in 5th gear. No, dang it. Do what I tell you to do. And with a manual transmission, there is no computer getting involved between you and what gear and where you want to be in the power band of your engine. So I'm just enjoying it while I can. I'm enjoying it right now with a 354 horsepower V8, 6 gears as God intended, and 3 pedals. Because I know that my children may never experience that being able to drive a manual transmission vehicle is going to be as useful as, oh man, as useful as another butt cheek growing out of your forehead. I mean, there's going to come a time where just, I can drive manual transmission. Okay, Grandpa, you just go sit down, Gramps. It's been a long day. Back in my day, we had 3 pedals. Okay, you just take this medicine and go sit back down in your chair. Yes, we know, manual transmissions, Grandpa. Yes, we understand. That's what it's going to be like one day for me. So let me just enjoy while I have to burn dead dinosaurs. I would rather row my own boat. I would rather shift my own gears before I fully dive into electric vehicles and enjoy that end of the spectrum. I think I'll end it there. I could say plenty more. You know me. I could say plenty more on the subject. I can go on plenty more rabbit trails. I released a new video on YouTube. As a reminder, you listened to the podcast a day or two ago about the 8-bit DOE Zero. I did a full review on it, the 8-bit DOE Zero and Zero 2. By the way, those are both identical devices. The only thing that the Zero 2 adds is different firmware that allows for more compatibility with different devices. But functionally, they're the same. It's the same weight, same buttons. Everything is exactly the same. It's just a little bit of code inside the circuits that allow for the Zero 2 to be compatible with more things like a Nintendo Switch. So I uploaded that full review video up on YouTube. Go check it out. Go subscribe to the Geek Therapy Radio YouTube if you haven't already. What else? I think that's really it. I said my affirmations at the beginning, but just remember, you're loved, you're worthy of love, giving and receiving love. We're all geeks about something. Lean into your inner geek. I'll see you tomorrow for the broadcast.
Geek Therapy Radio, Saturday night at 10 on KPRC 950. Or listen anytime on our iHeartRadio app.